What is up, folks? Welcome to episode 1 of the Muscle Method Podcast with myself, Taylor Comeau, and Mr. Erik Paterson here. A little bit about myself. So I'm an IFBB pro in the Classic Physique division, as well as a contest prep coach and personal trainer and nutritionist. Erik, why don't you take it away, man?
I'm a kinesiologist, personal training mostly. So I'm doing mostly in-person training. Taylor was actually a coach of mine for my first classic bodybuilding show. So that's after lifting for almost half my life. So 16, 17 years lifting now, and probably a decade of that of people asking me why haven't I competed yet. I just enjoyed the whole process without the competition aspect. So Taylor, of course, is coaching, some higher level guys or guys who are trying to get up to a higher level in bodybuilding. And you're probably coaching some
folks, yeah.
It was like kind of general health guys,
yep,
and girls. And so I think we both kind of have a good understanding of, the bodybuilding world, body composition world. And then we kind of both have different perspectives to put forward. But this is our first shot at this. So we're just kind of winging it. This is weird for me, especially talking into a camera. So this is something I'm just trying to get better at. And I guess it's the only way. So let's just go for it.
Do your reps. So the purpose of this podcast is basically to take all the complex and misleading and confusing information out there about in the lifting world and break it down into its relatively simplest form and give you actionable, useful bits of information that you can digest and process and apply to yourselves to just go and get the best results that you can.
Yeah, and if I'm going to add to that, we can make things more complex as needed, right? But first and foremost, for 99% of you, it's just about simplifying and then applying, the fundamentals, the basics, perfecting those things. And then, hey, now we can, I'm pretty good at these things. I've gotten to a pretty good intermediate level, let's say. And, I'm ready to start working on those 1%, focusing on the other minutia, we'll call it. And I guess we both see people trying to major in the minors first. They're focusing on all the minutia, and they don't even have the basics down.
Yeah.
So, we can go on and on about that, and I'm sure we'll expand upon that of this episode and hopefully later episodes. But
So the topic at hand today, broadly sweeping, is volume and fatigue, which is a very challenging topic in itself, and one that definitely invokes a lot of paralysis by analysis and a lot of fights online. So today we're going to kind of answer some questions that people have posed to us. We're going to discuss some of the important things and not important things around volume and fatigue and try to help you guys figure out what is right for you in terms of programming and changing things up for your needs.
Perfect. Yeah, and so I think what we were going to start with is just going over some terminology that we're going to be using, because we're going to be repeating this terminology again and again and again. And sometimes people they think they know what we're talking about, but sometimes people all have a slightly different definition of a certain thing. So first off, when we say volume, so training volume. So that would be, as both of us understand, and I know most of the training world, volume is the number of sets that you train with. So let's say per muscle, or just for total altogether across all muscle groups. But it's not just any set, working sets. So we're not counting our warm-up sets. That's all part of a good workout. We can go over that later. But working sets, so hard sets. Okay, so I'll let you touch on this. Like, what would be a hard set? So what, there's obviously failure, hard as you can go. Then there's failure, your form fucking falls apart entirely. You keep going past failure. We're not hitting the target muscle anymore. And then there's reps in reserve and stuff. But generally, how would you go about defining that?
I would go in defining a set as a set to failure meaning if you're doing a pull down, you're actually pulling with your lats, not just yanking it with your arms. At the point that your lats fail, that's when we would define failure.
And yeah, I would agree with that, especially from a bodybuilding standpoint. I guess where this topic gets really broad is maybe from a powerlifting or strength training standpoint. It's pretty common to, do plenty of sets where it's just technique work. And those are still working sets. Those are still going to be fatiguing because you're still working with heavy relative load.
So we are going to define some things here, and starting off with defining volume and what we would consider a working set. So if I were to define it, I'm going to define one set as a direct set for that muscle. So for example, one bicep curl is a direct movement for said group. I'm not including pull downs as bicep work within that or something else. So a direct exercise for that muscle group to failure with appropriate form is how I would define one working set.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And even though it's a lot of rowing and such, that's going to factor in, especially in the order of your training. But I never bother trying to record, even a half set. I don't bother with that. I don't think there's any usage there. So yeah, right on the money there. So just the main targeted muscle has been taken to failure or within very close proximity, right? Or let's say form mechanical failure, I believe it's called, when your form breaks down, you can't maintain form and continue on with the set, hitting the target muscle. So either or.
Perfect.
Yeah.
What are some of the other things we said we were going to define there?
So we're talking training volume, fatigue. So fatigue, that's a very broad one. Obviously physical fatigue, mental fatigue, but obviously we'll just start with specific to training fatigue. Obviously, training hard is going to come with some kind of a fatigue cost. And so if we're going to talk about the two extremes, and we see in the fitness world, which is very nuanced, we often see camps, and they're often at opposite extremes, and they often start, biting at each other and hating each other somehow for whatever reason. And so it's pretty funny. It's pretty entertaining to see these interactions, but I don't think it's very helpful for the people that are trying to gain some benefit from this. So it seems like an ego match between these two groups. I'm okay. We're trying to help people, and then how can we do that? So the one extreme, we'll say, literally describing fatigue in some sense as the fatigue demon, as you have to avoid it at all costs. And how you do that is basically by getting the biggest stimulus possible on that muscle in this sense, as few number of sets as possible. And there are some great things that can come from that. I think that's a great way to initially approach training, but we'll get on into how there are shortcomings to that. And then the other extreme, especially with seeing some of the recent research, I think one of them was even saying benefits upwards of 52 sets per week on a muscle. 52. So obviously, the downsides of that are a little bit more obvious, and obviously we're going to see fatigue, higher amounts of fatigue from 52 sets, but these are showing benefit. We're going to kind of go into why it's definitely not 52 sets per week that pretty much anyone should be aiming for. Even if there is a potential benefit, I see no long term. But we'll go into that. Same with the very, very, very low volumes, especially for newbies. On one end, very little can help them, but on the other end, they don't know how to get the most out of that.
So I'm going to define fatigue as the overall accumulation from every aspect. So there's your day job, there's your lifting, there's your cardio, there's your relationship stress, there's your lack of sleep or the quality of your sleep. I'm going to encompass it within all those things. So fatigue is a huge factor in every aspect of our life in that sense.
All of bodybuilding, right?
Yeah. So as a primarily a coach to bodybuilders, as we get into the end of a contest prep or just in life in general, we're trying to understand all those stimulus and what is causing an individual to have fatigue, and then prescribe an appropriate amount of volume that they can recover from within all these factors. So a guy like myself who sits behind a desk like this all day long, maybe I can get away with 1 or 2 extra sets versus someone who works construction all day long and maybe has a wife and kids and other requirements throughout the day. So coming back to it again, fatigue being the overall sum of stimulus that one receives from various places throughout the day. I know that's such a broad definition, but that really kind of is what it encompasses.
You mentioned that defining the number of sets that you would prescribe based on their amount of stress. And I would even go and say, like, yeah, we can go about it that way, or we can go about it the other way. Like, hey, how can we address these stressors? Because there are always going to be ones we can address through lifestyle modification. And that's often the first thing you're going to address before, you even talk about like doing something crazy with your training volume. And it just goes back and forth. But I mean, I don't know about you, but I say I got like an intermediate and I'm deciding on training volume. I'm not thinking too far into it. I've got kind of like a decent dosage, and we'll say a decent dose. What would you say? 6 to 8 sets per muscle group.
6 to 12.
Yeah, there's a range. And that's going to depend on how many hours they're in the gym, blah, blah, blah. But that 6 to 12, that's still a reasonable amount for most people. Yeah.
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 Easy to recover from. Yeah. All right. Next up.
So we talked about volume and like what is a hard set. But I think as individuals, people, especially newer people, don't know how to objectively define that. So they're very subjective, like I train really hard. Like I train so hard. I train harder than anyone I know. And it's like, what are you basing that on? That's very subjective. You can't. So we want to, wherever possible, try to measure something like the intensity. And that's what we're talking about in the end, the intensity of training in terms of how hard you're training. And how hard you're training is really how close you can take that muscle to failure. And a lot of people will think I'm training to failure, or I'm training, within 1 or 2 reps from failure. And when you actually go and get them in front of a trainer or something, and they're watching you and they, stop, oh, that's 2 in reserve. And I say, no. And then they do 4 more. So right away, okay, there's a limitation there in terms of prescribing a hard set if people aren't even truly doing that hard set. And you see that more often with legs, like training legs and stuff. Like it hurts. The legs have a way of, quads especially, of just juicing out more reps, even when your whole body is saying no more. Okay, so that's a big caveat, I guess, to the whole.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. So if we're trying to figure out how much volume,
which is kind of what we went over, right?
Yeah.
Hitting that, we're trying to hit a target muscle. We're trying to take that target muscle to failure within that proximity. So we went over that. So we'll just go over, strength training, powerlifting, maybe, let's say powerlifting first, because that's where there's a big discrepancy, even though there's so many overlapping things, more muscle, more force production potential. But with powerlifting, you've got 3 lifts. Okay, so you're just specifically training 3 lifts. And we're not thinking about muscles in those 3 lifts. Okay, they involve certain muscles, but we don't care. We think about how much weight can we for 1 rep within the guidelines, the rules. Okay, so what you see from that is a huge skill requirement. Okay, so when there's a skill requirement, just like any other skill in life, let's say I bring this one up with clients. Let's say yo-yo. You want to get better at yo-yo? Are you going to do it for 1 minute a day? You could, but you're not going to get good very fast, right? You're probably never going to get well. You're probably going to be doing it for at least 10 minutes a day or something like that. Obviously, with lifting, there's the fatigue cost. There's more fatigue lifting heavy weights than playing yo-yo. But that's where we can play around with reps in reserve. So if I want to get more practice with a lift, but I still need that specificity of being under some relatively heavy load, because I can't just use just the bar and do a whole bunch of sets and expect that to actually translate to a 1 rep max eventually. It's going to actually do very little to translate to even do sets of 10. It might be just a good introductory for a newbie to understand the motor pattern. But what we need is probably a decent amount of load, enough that it's like, shit, this is pretty heavy, and we can define that further, but I don't see the point here. But we would do, say, for a squat pattern, we probably wouldn't want to just do 2 sets or 3 sets for that squat pattern, once a week, like we might do with a bodybuilding exercise. We're probably going to want to get under that bar, as much as possible, and rep with as much load as possible, while still being able to string weeks and months of training together. That way we get that stimulus, but we also get, we can work on that skill. Also, we'll touch on with strength training. It's a little bit different. You want to actually be a little bit more careful with fatigue when it comes to strength training. And you actually can benefit more from leaving some reps in reserve. So that's what some of the research is showing, at least. So often seeing, like, say you're doing 5 sets of 5, most of those sets are probably 3, 4 in reserve, and maybe the final 2, you're getting a little bit closer to failure, but there doesn't seem to be a very good benefit, at least on a week by week basis, of training to failure with those main lifts. Okay. So that could be for a variety of reasons. And that's where we can go way off, on a tangent. But I don't think I want to turn this into a big strength powerlifting thing. I think I'd rather just apply it to, our target population, and we can touch on bits or get some further questions down the road and get a little bit more detailed with stuff.
Yeah. So I guess a big question that we're trying to help people answer today is how to figure out how much volume they need to do in order to not develop too much fatigue. So a way to jump into that is kind of, we touched on it already, is a general prescription for working sets per week, and just a regular lifting aspect being 6 to 12. So 6 to 12 biceps, 6 to 12 tricep, et cetera, et cetera. So the way that I would kind of word it to someone who really doesn't know where to start is, let me start at the minimum per week of 6 sets and assess from there. If I'm doing 3 sets of chest on Monday and then 3 sets again on Thursday, and then am I able to recover in between those sessions? So after my Monday lifts, am I going into Thursday with a fresh chest? There's no issues. There's no nothing when I'm stretching through the initial movements. And then am I seeing progressive overload on at least my top set of those lifts, and then go from there. And then on top of just, those minimum sets per week, it's what's my total load and day job and other things. So that's when we start to get a little bit more complex with it, but just an overall initial prescription. Try to train something 2 times per week with a minimum of 3 working sets to failure is where I would go from that, and then start plugging and playing, which we could dive into a bit more.
We talked about this, but at the end of the day, I think even before we talk about modifying the volume, at the end of the day, you got to ask yourself, say you did those 6 sets per week, which is a pretty minimal amount spread across 2 days. You ask yourself, am I getting better? You have that honest question. And some people, I'll ask people this question who are gym rats, who have been going to the gym a lot, and they're sometimes even confused by the question. They'll say, I'm just training, I'm getting a great pump, or they're talking about all these other cool things that are happening, and getting a good pump is nice and it feels like you're doing something. But what I'm referring to is say you did for the last 3 weeks, 10, 9, 8, or somewhere around there reps with 100 pounds, whatever it is, whatever exercise. And you're supposed to be in kind of a progression phase. You're doing all the things to grow muscle, surplus, blah, blah, blah. And, it's not moving. It's not progressing. Okay. That's what you really need to ask yourself in the first place. Because if that's 3 sets per week on that chest and you're progressing that just fine, I mean, I would even kind of go on to say, like, do we need to even start adding more? I think someone's going to hit a plateau on that pretty quick. And I think from a
Yeah.
bodybuilding standpoint, yeah, I think it's pretty safe to add some sets to that. And it's not going to make fatigue go wild. And then, you know what we didn't really cover is, okay, why is fatigue such a bad thing? And it's not a bad thing. In fact, it's going to be a necessary cost of training hard, of trying to bring your body physically to beyond where it is now to get further adaptations. And accumulating points of pretty high fatigue does not mean that you're not progressing either. Okay.
Yeah.
So that's a big thing to point out. Yes, fatigue can mask performance, and then that can make you feel like you're not progressing, and that's where it gets confusing. So what we got to pick up on is if this fatigue is just accumulating, or if it's just, hey, a few days because you had stress at work, bad sleep, blah, blah, blah. It's not an excuse to just take a week off. Rarely. There are times when, yes, a deload is necessary, but fatigue is going to be part of this, and it's going to result in you feeling, going to the gym, and you're going to feel less than ideal. Like you would have felt better in the short term if you did not go and train. And that keeps a lot of people from training. Like,
Yeah.
Heart rate.
One important thing I want to highlight too, and this just dives into the complexities a little bit more, but just because you didn't see progressive overload 1 week from another doesn't mean you're not actually making progress. Depending on your training age, depending on the time of day you go to the gym, depending on your hydration levels, depending on what you've eaten, depending on what you did the day before, et cetera, is all going to influence your ability to output force, i.e. progressive overload. So it's about consistency within your factors and seeing and repeating certain things day to day to give you the best outcomes of being able to say, okay, I am experiencing adaptations and growth, or I'm not because of reasons X, Y, and Z.
Yeah. And you guys can see how you're getting to sort of see how broad and complex this is. It kind of entails everything to do with bodybuilding when we're talking about nutrition factors into fatigue and recovery and sleep and every sort of stress. So it's hard not to just start going off in tangents talking about all these things as we try to make a point. So we're going to do the best we can. You guys can criticize us after, or we can expand on this in further podcasts and more detailed into certain topics.
Yeah. So if you're listening and you didn't increase your reps or weight from the week prior, don't automatically assume you need a deload because you're fatigued.
But also don't go freaking, weeks and months of being at the same, using the same weights and just thinking you're squeezing the muscle harder, you're getting a better pump or something. You're adding sets, but you're not actually getting stronger, which is the dumbest thing of all. That's what we're kind of getting at with that. You kind of got to circle back. It's been some weeks and I'm still stuck here. It's not budging. Maybe I should ignore all these subjective things and just focus on why am I not objectively improving on this lift? And what can I do? That's your next question. What do I look at before even volume? That's what we can cover on the next topic. If progress stalls at a given volume point, why would I not immediately just go to volume as the culprit? Okay. So if you have anything to touch on that, what would you do when someone starts stalling on a lift?
Yeah. If someone starts stalling, so we look at, what's their caloric consumption? What's their sleep like? How old are they? How long have they been doing the same lift, right? What's their programming and sequencing been looking at?
If it's the first,
Yeah, if you're doing flat bench at the start of every single one of your push days and you've been doing that for 5 years, well, Cesar, it's not going to be seeing much progress. But if you start changing the order of things and you're a little fresher in your sequencing with a certain movement, then all of a sudden, week to week, oh, it goes up by 2.5 or 5 pounds or 10 pounds time to time. So those are some things you need to think about too.
Can I jump in with I guess this is a bit of a self plug though. Bench press, me on bench press, for example. I guess I'm a pretty good bencher. I've benched 460, and throughout the year, I'll probably vary between like a 430 and that max throughout the year. And it honestly, if I'm being honest, it hasn't budged. It's probably been 10 years, and it's probably gone up 30, 40 pounds. Okay. Has my chest stopped growing? No, it's definitely slowed down from the first few years, like very slow, because I've been doing this for a long time. But when I switched to a different pressing movement, something that's more of a novel stimulus for me, because I'm already very efficient at bench press, and there are limitations to getting better at one lift when you are already juicing so much out of it. So I'll get into a new pressing pattern, one that, I'll just go by feel. Hey, that's a good range of motion and a good contraction. I'm stable. I can produce a lot of force with this. I see, a future where I can progress this pretty reliably. And, I could improve that particular movement maybe 20% in a year. Whereas I'm never going to put 20% on my bench in my lifetime unless I want to do the super bulk 3000, the Go Mad gallon of milk a day. If you guys, that's from years back, which I tried for 2 days and it's disgusting.
Yeah, that's a good point. So one would hope that a lot of the folks listening to this are, we'll call them beginner to intermediates. So your ability to progress is going to be much more substantial than Erik and mine's, whereas we are definitely advanced. So you're able to see these measurable changes week to week because things aren't happening. For us, something not happening does not indicate fatigue.
Your potential to advance should be better than ours. And I can say that, I think we can both say that pretty confidently. PDs are not. Like, if you are relatively new to lifting, you can get so bloody strong when you get the right thing together. And I think even for those that think, oh, my genetics aren't that good. First of all, most people are average. Most people are very average. A lot of people like to think they're a special snowflake, but most people are very average. So yeah, like beginner to intermediate, especially low intermediate, you should be seeing some pretty relatively frequent progression if you think you're checking all those boxes. And if you're not, this is where we can go into that.
Yeah, so that's a good one. So how do you know if you are fatigued, and how do you measure that's happening? So from a standpoint of someone like ourselves, okay, if our lifts are staying the same, chances are it's not a fatigue issue. But for you and I, if we start seeing our numbers go down, or we start seeing a slight accumulation of injuries potentially, right? It's like, oh, my elbow's starting to nag a little bit. Oh, I'm not sleeping that great. For me, sometimes it's a sign of accumulation of fatigue. Could be my low back going out, as you know.
It can be very individual,
So
fatigue and bull stuff. Sometimes it's
so to look and see if you're experiencing it is going to be to say, okay, if I'm a new to intermediate lifter, am I seeing decreases in my logbook? And then ask yourself, yes, is that happening? No, is that not happening? But then ask yourself what are the lifestyle factors at play that may also be contributing on top of the potential prescription of too much volume that I have right now. Or maybe it is also a flaw in your program design where your frequency is just too soon. So say, for example, you did some chest on Monday, but then you trained it again on Wednesday and you haven't actually had a chance to recover because you did too much in that first session. So there's a lot of things to look at which make it more complicated, but I think the first sign is going to be saying, okay, am I seeing regressions in my numbers? And how do I feel physically in terms of mental clarity and sleep and things like that? And do I feel sluggish throughout the day? Would be a relatively subjective thing to look at because we can't clearly define what those are because only the person will feel them themselves.
And I think your body can actually tolerate, quite a bit of this fatigue before, it's not going to just fall apart. Eventually, you're just not going to, with a high intensity thing like lifting weights, fatigue is going to express itself sometimes in just, you cannot do the reps with the weight that you usually can, assuming everything else is relatively the same. So that is the best. So like say that's a big thing to look at, that it's going to be maybe it is a volume, a training fatigue specifically thing when like, hey, I'm nailing all those other things outside of here that I usually am. Okay. And I'm hitting this wall. I'm not even just maintaining, I'm maybe even starting to slide back. And yeah, you talked about maybe I'm starting to get some nagging kind of joint things occurring. A big one for me, personally, I get to the point where I just don't even want to be at the gym. So I start to, if my fatigue in general in life is high, that coincides with my gym performance pretty highly. I don't enjoy the things that I usually enjoy. Like that's kind of like a general, I'm kind of just generally kind of a little bit apathetic towards things, especially the gym. And you and I are probably quite in tune with our bodies from doing this for so long. That's one big benefit of bodybuilding. You get really good at just reading those things. So I think we're probably both pretty good at just knowing when to just pull back a few days. We're not going to lose all our muscle.
Yeah. Yes. You're not going to atrophy into oblivion by taking a day
Better
or two off.
things happen sometimes with rest when you have the right balance. That's the whole complexity of this shit.
And then one thing about that, a lot of young guys just love to train and want to go 6 or 7 days a week. And I was one of those guys. I never trained 7 days a week, but in my youth, I did go 6 days a week. And honestly, that wasn't a good thing.
7 days at some point, it's just like, oh, I'm bored. Let's go to the gym.
Yeah. So one of the things I help a lot of younger guys with, is, okay, no, you're training way too much. Honor your days off. Don't go. Don't do anything. Sit down and relax and chill. It will help you be better, which is a hard mindset to have sometimes when some guys just see the hardcore motivation. Go, 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 go. Go to the extreme. 100 sets to failure.
And I think
blah, blah, blah.
The big irony of all this is the most motivated people are the ones that are going to be running into these issues, because you see that in high-level athletes, the overtraining syndrome, which is really rare, like a true overtraining syndrome where you're messed up. And you only really saw that in high-level athletes who are really doing everything right outside of the training, but they are just pushing themselves. They're so motivated to go to that dark place, like with their training, and they just so badly want to get better that they will ignore those signs. And never mind just a high-level athlete, but a young guy who, I meet all kinds of young guys who absolutely love the gym, because I was one of those guys. And I used to just pummel myself. Like when I look back, it's ridiculous it's impressive. Like I used to work very, very hard, but it was super dumb, dumb training. And it sort of worked because I was young. That's the one thing. You don't have many other stressors in life. But looking back, I would have probably trained with maybe even 1/3 of the volume. I would actually track things. That at the beginning either. So
I was a victim of going on bodybuilding.com and seeing the Jay Cutler split and being like, oh, I'm going to do that.
Man, it's hilarious how like to anyone, not that we're old, but even just a decade ago, the access to good information was dramatically different. In fact, online there was, unless you were lucky to come across like Lyle McDonald, like me, even like closer to 10, 12 more years ago, most of the stuff was non-existent, or it was just pro bodybuilders. And I do want to touch on, let's touch on that, the confirmation bias that people get from their favorite pros and how they train. We'll touch on that next. But we do a lot of dumb shit. And so at least if you can get something out of Taylor and I talking, as we've done this for a long time, and we are very passionate about this stuff. And I think we've come to a point where we're pretty self-reflective on what we've done wrong over the years. And that's probably the shit I've done wrong is probably what I try to tell my clients. Like, don't do that. It doesn't work. If I could go back, I would train this way. Okay.
Cool. Confirmation bias. So you can fall in love with someone doing a certain method and seeing results. And then we know that the outcome that they achieved is because of one simple factor of they were consistent with it. They did something hard, i.e. with intensity and good form. And it's really that simple to see results. And you can see results doing pretty wrong things, even over a long course of time.
We're talking like I think all the pros, I would say, are pretty much, first of all, yeah, if you're a pro genetically, 99 of 100 times, you're not really hardworking yourself necessarily to get up on the pro stage, at least in like the Olympia. There's always going to be a genetics there. But these guys check pretty much 99% of the same boxes in terms of everything else to do with bodybuilding. And eating being one of those things that it's like yin and yang with the body, the lifting part itself. Like you cannot be a bigger, massively bigger, progressively higher performing person without progressing the amount of energy that you consume. Right. So yeah, calories, and then their sleep, and then it's all they care about is lifting, and of course the drugs. And they were willing to go on to the extreme levels with drugs too. Most of them, some of them are a lot smarter these days, but most of them are still going to be on that extreme end. And that's it if we're talking about the Olympia stage. But
yeah. One thing that what you just said also reminded me of another thing that we were going to talk about. It's the importance of form. I know this is kind of complete tangent to what we were saying, but it reminded me we hadn't touched on it yet. It's how using form and execution and intensity, assessing if that is appropriate first over adjusting volume, because I don't think we talked about that yet. So if you're not seeing measurable results, whether it's increases in weight or reps, and you're not seeing the visual outcomes that you want in terms of, I'm a bodybuilder, my chest isn't growing or my biceps aren't growing, are you actually training them correctly? What does your form look like? What does your range of motion look like? What does your intensity look like? What does your control look like? All these little factors that come down to, no, maybe this muscle's bad genetically. No, are you actually using it properly? Is a huge thing to look at first before just throwing more volume at something.
For me, and I've done this for a long time, I'm always picking apart myself for that. We're probably both guilty of that, when we're, get used to training a muscle and it's working. We've gotten to the point we've gotten to, but if you're not constantly, picking apart your own training, I'm like, hey, I'm training hard and I'm training correctly, but what can I get even more out of this? If we're talking one set at a time. So again, going back to volume, before I decide to add sets to this muscle because it's not growing, am I really putting, the best execution I possibly put into this? Am I being very good about selecting exercises, not just because they're popular on social media, but because they work for me, my individual proportions, the equipment that is available to me. It can go even down to, the training that muscle. Am I training that at the end of my workouts? Calves are probably the classic example of people, I train my calves, but usually what is it at the end of the leg day? See some half-ass reps. So let's go into that in the next one. How about did you have more to say about the pro and the pros and form?
Well, no, that's just today.
And it's hard to go into without actually posting videos of execution and why, like, to go too deep into that. So I don't think we should try to jump too far into that.
Fair enough. Sweet. I've got a few questions I think would be helpful to help us dive into some things. We kind of touched on some of these kind of broadly, but this will be a good way to give examples. So I've got a good question here. What is your method for volume when a client says they want to grow a certain body part? So when I hear that, the first thing I think is, well, how much are you currently doing, right? Are you doing 2 sets per week? Are you doing 20 sets per week? And then, okay, if it's not growing from 20, probably doing way too much. If it's not growing from 2, not doing enough. So then we need to take it back to the simple broad prescription. What is, the minimum amount you can do? Probably 6, maximum maybe 12, and go from there. And what does that volume look like spaced out throughout the week? So are you doing all 6 to 12 of your sets in one workout, or are you spacing those out doing 3 to 6 sets 2 times per week? And then it's what is that muscle group, and is there potentially any other times where it's seeing some type of stimulus? So, for example, a bicep or a tricep. And are the movements that you're doing that are supposed to be pressing and or pulling using entirely the bicep or tricep instead of the target muscle, to go from there. So it's a long way of saying, is the person's form right and how much volume are they doing before we then need to look into how much should we make them do?
And I think because the form thing can, like, it's hard to define. It's hard to even go into that. Something more tangible would be, okay, out of those whatever exercises you were choosing for that muscle, are you doing like, say, your 20 sets, but are you doing like 10 different exercises? So from a skill standpoint, like, say for the bicep curl, what does the bicep do? I mean, it flexes the elbow, and then there's some supination in there too, but it doesn't do anything. There's nothing more fancy than that. Yeah, we can bias certain lengths and stuff, but I think we could do that really maximally hit the biceps in 2, maybe 3 if you throw in like a hammer curl variation. What do you think about that? Maybe 4 if you're going really crazy, but I mean, at a time, say in a program at a time, obviously you can rotate out. So, if you're just scattering all these different bicep exercises around and there's not really a lot of just focus and improvement on the execution of just maybe a couple, maybe you're going to get more out of just getting really, really good within a block of training on 2, 3, maybe 4 sometimes. Okay, and sometimes you can train that same exercise twice a week. You do 3 sets of a preacher curl one day, and then maybe that just like really works for your bicep. So maybe bring it in later on. It's still bicep curl, right? You don't need to get too fancy thinking that you're going to hit different angles of the muscle, because you're really not. And that's also if you're not focusing on just getting better. Is this weight improving? And then one more, the exercise order. If you're doing a push-pull lower routine and you're doing on push days triceps, and you're doing the triceps at the end of a workout, but you really want your triceps to improve specifically, they're going to probably be less, more fatigued at the end of that workout. If you were to bring them up at the front and go super crazy, if you really want those triceps to improve, you see some of those, let's say the UK guys are doing some cool stuff with maybe just throwing in 3 sets of arms on a leg day, right in front of a leg day. And, you do those bicep 3 sets, you can really put you're fresh, but then it doesn't take it out of you to do the rest of your workout. So that's just a kind of a smart way of doing things that a lot of people don't want to do, because it just messes with their mind when it comes to a typical bodybuilding split. And it can be a game changer. So are you willing to, do you really want to improve this muscle group? Then maybe ask yourself, am I doing all the things that I possibly could to improve this muscle group before I just throw a bunch of freaking volume at it? This is why I think as we get closer to a conclusion here, people are maybe seeing the trend that we don't think just volume is, once you're beyond like a pretty moderate amount or high moderate, rarely do I think adding volume is kind of like, that's the one. And if it is, maybe it's adding a set per week. But I'll look at all those other things first, probably.
So I guess to give a summarizing answer to that is, find the amount of volume that works and then space it out appropriately for how you as an individual recover that muscle group. For example, I could probably train my legs every other day and be just fine, versus my chest, I might need every 3 or 4 days with a couple sets.
Let me just throw it real quick to that. The first time you try that, right, the higher frequency, keep in mind your body has to have a little adjustment period. So maybe you're used to just training one muscle once per week, and you add frequency. Even if you split the volume, maybe you feel at first that you're not as recovered, but maybe give it a little bit of time before you go, this doesn't work. My bicep hasn't grown in the 1 week. Okay, so there is a, relax, apply it, actually give it a chance. Allow your body to adapt to certain things like that and overcome those adaptations so that you can train at a higher frequency.
So next question is a fatigue related question. So with programming, how do you combat progressive fatigue affecting exercises? So meaning what's your exercise sequencing and order going to look like in order to not just be completely dead at the end of a workout. So don't do, 10 sets of squats followed by 10 sets of deadlifts type thing. If you're expecting to actually recover and not be an absolute zombie.
Yeah, we didn't cover the, types of exercise and how some are inherently more fatiguing.
Yeah. So I guess a broad way of looking at that is, compound movements generally going to be your more fatiguing things versus, something very simple. Overall fatiguing things, because then we can start getting into a lot of complicated stuff where some guys are going to tell you don't do 3 single joint movements in a workout because you'll be too fatigued, right? 10 sets of squats versus 10 sets of single arm tricep extensions on each side is a whole different animal, right? You can't compare those two. So essentially overall, if you expect to not get too burnt out, I would say start with your heavier, more compound things and then go into your lighter, more focused areas. And of course, that depends on the individual's goal too, but that's kind of a broad way of looking at it. So on a leg day, start with a squat pattern, then go into an extension. Don't just do a couple different squat patterns, then a couple presses, then your extension, if you actually don't want to drive yourself into the ground.
Exercise redundancy and stuff too. Yeah, and we can go off on that. It's like, where do we stop? Yeah, I think you covered that one pretty good. So I just got the one. I'm trying to bring up the whole question, but I feel like I can only see partial. So I know the first bit of it says, so enhance first natural capacity to train with high volume. And I guess I'll just touch on that. Yeah, we know with PEDs, but when you say PEDs, that's also a stupidly broad topic, and then how you respond. But yeah, generally you're just going to recover better with PEDs, assuming you're doing all those other things correctly, right? But I think I don't think that's actually a big significant thing you're going to take from if you decide to use performance enhancing drugs is better up my volume. If anything, you should, if you are deciding, and hopefully you've done your research, blah, 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 we're not doctors. That's your own choice. Make sure you're doing all those other things that we spoke about pretty damn good. Obviously, guys are going to jump on before they're ready. But I don't think just slapping volume on is going to amount to what you think you're going to get from it. And then the second thing is how they may affect joint integrity, or at least connective tissue integrity. So I know we've got pretty good studies saying that, say you're taking, high testosterone, exogenous testosterone, that your collagen synthesis actually, your muscles recover faster and their ceiling for growth potentially gone up, nitrogen retention level. Connective tissue will not adapt at that same, match that rate of adaptation. So if your muscle, and thus the force you can put out with that muscle, is rapidly, exceeding the rate at which your tendons can adapt, that right there is going to be a limiter, because people are going to either just get tendonitis, get sore and not be able to push hard, or things are going to start to break, or you're, so that's a consideration. And that can be an individual, that can be where we talk about exercise selection and all those things.
Yeah.
But that's about probably all. How much further do you think you would dive into that in terms of volume?
Yeah. I mean, for every person, you always want to think of what is the appropriate prescription of volume based on all the factors at hand. So we always consider that, whether the individual is natural or enhanced or not. And then when we go into enhanced, it's okay. There's the host of what are they using? When are they using it? Body fat percentage? Are we near a contest prep? How is it affecting the hormonal cascade of all the other things? How seasoned is this person in their lifting career, et cetera, et cetera?
So much from that.
Yeah, that's a really complex question to break into.
Anyone who says otherwise, like how much can you really control there? You have to be working with an athlete for a pretty long time, kind of knowing how they respond, how they You can adjust things, assuming they're being honest with, what they're taking and how they're feeling. And keep in mind that, PEDs are going to improve recovery for muscles. And then, you're going to get more output of your nervous system. But that's going to come with its own unique level of fatigue, because you're running your body technically beyond what it should be able to run at. So, we can get into the oxidative stress and all the just stressors of running something and pushing your body to that level. Your nervous system, your sympathetic nervous system's just toned up a little bit, so we can get a little bit of an immediate improvement in force production. But there's going to come a cost where, you push too much, things break, or you just need to pull back eventually. And not just for health reasons. We won't get into the obviously that is a risk when you take these things, but just literally you're not going to be able to just hammer yourself with more and more drugs. Otherwise you'd see, especially in Kelowna, 1,000 guys walking around looking like Arnold. And the reality is, like, I don't know if you agree with me, Taylor, like the average guy that who uses, they kind of look like average. A slightly more watery, fuller version of what they did when they were drug free. And that's the reality. And not taking away from what these things can do when used properly, because they are an absolutely massive advantage. But not, I think, in the way that it's not a shortcut in that same way, I should say. But that's a whole nother window open. And I don't think either of us should even try to go down that road, because it's just not enough to know, right? Or we don't know enough, right?
Yeah. So this is another question I got. So thoughts about training biceps on Sunday, Tuesday, and Thursday, and then triceps on Monday, Wednesday, Friday. So as soon as you read this, you just kind of your brain kind of breaks, because you're thinking, okay, so we're training these muscle group 3 times a week, and then you're training there's 2 things you're doing 3 times a week on different days. So then you have to think of, well, when am I training the other stuff? And am I even able to recover from that? So when I hear this question, because of how it immediately just kind of breaks everything, it's like, no, let's not do this.
It's a simple bad way to format a question, for sure.
Yeah. But just in terms of frequency and programming like that is not going to be a good idea. I mean, you're training every single day except for Saturday, and then you're training something 3 times a week on different days. It just isn't going to jive. You're not going to be able to recover the way you want. You're not going to see the progress you want. So if you really want to try to grow your arms, I would probably do potentially a push-pull legs and then an arms day, or like a push-pull legs, arms, lower day.
It's really, if you go into split, like workout splits, there's like a huge number of ways you can go about it. And it's going to depend on your other contexts. Like if you care about if some other muscles are just put on maintenance, that would be a big one.
Yeah.
If you just like all you care about over the next few months is growing your arms, sure, I think that actually could work. But we assume that you're pulling back in other areas, or just being okay with not progressing in other areas. Playing around with, okay, is that biceps at the front or at the back? Are you leaving reps in reserve, or are you just taking those to pure failure? Yeah, it's just, that's a kind of question that just ends up, you ask more questions. Yeah. So in the future, to whoever asked that question, that could be a good question if you just provide us with a little bit more context in terms of what this year program would look like, or that you're more specific with your goals.
I'm just going to, all right. So we talked a lot there about a few different things. So to kind of take it all back to give you guys something to work with, which is what we're trying to do, right? That was the point of what we intended to set with here. So we gave you guys a prescription of approximately 6 to 12 working sets per week. We define what those working sets are going to entail. How you split those up is up to you, and you kind of have to choose what you're able to recover from and where you dose that volume. We also ask that you guys stick with something for a period of time to be able to determine if it is or is not causing the outcome that you want, i.e. visual or strength adaptations. And don't just throw something in the toilet because it didn't happen after a week. Also make sure you're tracking things and staying consistent within your lifestyle factors, right? Obviously things happen, obviously things change, but consistency is key. And whether it's bodybuilding, whether it's powerlifting, success comes from just the daily mundane tasks and being good at them as well. So stick to your program. Don't program hop, and don't exercise hop either. Get good at the movement that you're doing and do it properly for a long period of time, and then you will see the changes that you want. And then is there anything else that I believe I missed there?
Yeah, I mean, you covered most of it, and we kind of, I guess I would just touch on, even though it seems like such a pain in the butt, and at the end of the day, some of you just like, I don't want to think so much, I just want to go and lift. I think a big thing, and I have this conversation with a lot of clients who have this attitude, like, I just want to get it done. But at the same time, they're also disappointed with some of the results they're getting. I always just, I'm like, Kate, what at the end of the day gives you the most reward out of this? Like, why are you doing this? Is it like just showing up to the gym and getting some stress out? Like, I know we both probably like that. But I think for both of us, the real reward comes from seeing progress. And sometimes that just means taking a brutal look inward and being very critical of yourself and what you're doing and how you're training. And if you are, as we talked about, tracking and standardizing the training that you are doing and not trying to be so wacky, changing things week by week, jumping onto different programs, jumping with different sets, concluding after like 2 weeks of training a certain way that is not working, or it's the best thing in the world, because you can't make that determination. That being said, you don't have to hate your training. You can put stuff in. You just, I just got this one in because I enjoy it. I do that too. But at least try to make it contribute to your progress, because I think even if you don't think so, I promise you that the most reward from all of this is that progress at the end of the day, getting better, hitting those PRs, every few months, like looking in the mirror and seeing like, damn, like I'm really improving. And, when we say try to track and standardize, these things and make very mature changes to your programming, not just being emotional about it. Track, I guess, like a scientist would, you try to measure what you can within reason. Track all your workouts, track all your sets, track all the reps. Approach every set with, tell my clients this all the time. Okay, you are doing the set now, tunnel vision. Okay, we're just doing 2 sets of these today. I want you to block out everything else, tunnel vision. Every rep, I want the last rep to look like the first rep. Okay, and just execute. Right? You're not just going through the motions. Ask yourself this. I think most of you know that there are a lot of times you're at the gym and you're just going through the motion. You're just doing sets. And I like, one thing I would do at the gym during my rest periods, I like to watch what other people are doing. I don't know why. It's like a people watching thing. I'm always interested in like watching people go about their workouts. And I would say the average person that I don't see really progressing, and I've seen a lot of people go to the gym for years, they're doing random shit. There's no rhyme or reason to it. One day they're lifting 100 pounds with this weight, with this exercise. The other week they're doing 50. One day they're doing 6 sets. One day they're doing 12 sets. One day they're looking on their phone and doing a tricep extension at the same time. And then, of course, so those people that are legitimately trying, and you can tell they're trying to be smart about it. But hopefully those people that are, already in that self-reflection stage, like, I want to get better, but I just don't know how. Hopefully you guys can get something out of this. And if you need further help, I guess, because this stuff at the end of the day, one podcast, we don't expect one podcast to clear the air for you guys and you know exactly what to do. Reach out. Don't be afraid to hire a coach. To self-plug there.
Yeah.
But yeah, I wish I would have had the opportunity to do that when I was younger. I was pretty stubborn. And I know a lot of younger guys out there are pretty stubborn and they think they know everything. Just like look in the mirror and like, just trust that you don't, because we don't. We've been doing it forever. And I think the more we do this, the more we realize what we don't know. That's what I would say about myself. And it's okay to own that. And it feels good to own that, because now you can start getting better. Just being realistic with yourself and guess that could apply to everywhere in life.
Yeah. 100%. Sweet.
Are you going to try to do yours? Or?
Okay. Folks, that was our first attempt at a podcast episode. We're obviously learning. As you guys are learning about training, we're learning about podcasting. So we're going to get better at this as time goes on. The editing might be choppy. We might interrupt each other. We don't know how the videos
go. All over the place.
That's okay. Yeah, we're going to get better at this, at organizing a podcast, much like you guys are.
What I would ask, if you guys have any advice for how we should set up a podcast, or definitely criticism. Like, I think we both know that we could be a lot better at this, and we went into this knowing that, and just knowing that this was going to be rough, and knowing that this topic was going to be a nasty one. But what we wanted to get from this is just, hey, at least you could see that, hey, I hope you think we know what we're talking about a little bit, and that you can get some, value from this and from whatever further podcasts we do. And ideally we're going to improve upon each one, and maybe just decide to do a little bit more concise subjects going forward. But this was a good challenge. It's definitely different for me talking into a computer, and but something I got to be better at. Yes. So.
Yeah. You guys will notice we never give, we probably didn't give any black and white answers, and asked a lot of questions to your questions. Yeah, because there's a lot of information that's needed to really truly say, do this or don't do this, or do that or don't do that. It's very individual specific sometimes, and very contextual, which is very important to getting the best out of your desired results. So with all that, thank you guys so much for listening. Thanks for helping us out. And we will be back soon. Shout out topics for the next episode that you want us to talk about in the comments below.